Like you had. It's like, oh, if you don't believe me, if you don't understand me, if you don't agree with me, you're evil. You are the spawn of Satan. You want society to crumble.
You want anarchy.
Yeah.
Ah,
It's like when I watched I'll tell you what, the Dave Chappelle show. I'm sorry. No, the last stand up he had.
yeah, the closer.
Yeah, the closer. Yeah. He had this like it was hilarious and it was like a big it was a giant story and that's my thing. I love stories and for if not for any other reason then it's a really good way to depict a lot of different things. And that's what I like shows. I like movies. That's what books, plays. I like all that shit, even the old shit, just because it's a good way of like bringing it all together.
Yeah.
Good way of depicting it all in different ways and different characters who have different experiences, and it's like we're so obsessed with like having a. Trying to get that pound of flesh, like oh, you're the bad guy. I want my just due, and even that's based off of that Shakespearean play. Um, the guy who wanted a pound of flesh and or like there was a guy who wanted a loan and he couldn't get it from anybody else and he goes to this guy who's kind of ostracized by the community and I don't want to jump down another rabbit hole but this guy just asked for a pound of flesh and it's like well if you pay me by this day and if you don't it's like I'll pay you with interest and all that like I don't want any of that late payments and shows he's like I don't want any of that just pay me by this day if you don't then I just want a pound of flesh. Like, all right, signs the paper. Something happens, he can't pay, and the guy's like, "Hey, I want that pound of flesh." And then he's like, "Oh no," and a bunch of other shit in between. But that's where that phrase came from. It came another story, and everybody's obsessed with getting a pound of flesh, and in this the story of Dave Chappelle doing the stand up with the closer. It's so it was so interesting because he's like he like explains the turf and I was like, oh, okay, kind of, I get it now. And then he's talking more transgender jokes again. But then at the very end, he has that story about he has this transgender friend who's a comedian, and or no, he said this lady like came to his all his shows, and have you seen it?
Yeah, you went
Okay.
to she. She
Yeah.
went to a couple of his shows in San Francisco.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't have to rehash the whole story, but like her story, like at the end of it, I was like, whoa, like that was intense. And what I took away from that is like, oh, like well, like here you have like a story about this guy Dave Chappelle, like a known comedian, real funny, real controversial, and he touches on a lot of controversial topics, but he's coming from a place of love, and he's always been known to making fun of everybody, and this community, particular transgender community, has like been really upset with him, and then he tells the story because they think he's real transphobic and like this is like he's inciting violence upon them and stuff like that. And then here's a story about someone, a transgender comic that he has. It's just like, and she's literally talking about how Dave doesn't punch down at anybody because to punch down you have to feel that you're on a higher level than them. It's like he just what was the phrase? It was killer. She's like, he doesn't punch up, he doesn't punch down, he just punches lines. Like punchlines, like a joke.
Yeah.
Oh, the puns. I was like, that was fantastic, yo. But then she talks about how she committed suicide, and like maybe it's like after the fact, or after what happened, or like 6 days after that happened, or whatever. And then at the end of the show, he's just like, well, just stop punching down. It's like, comics are my people, and he's like, and stop punching down on my people. And that's essentially what it is. Like, transgender community feels like they're above him in the sense of like the victim Olympics, and so they're just punching down at him as people or like comedians in general because like I don't like what you said, you're evil, and he's just like, hey, just don't do that. Just kind of like it flips it on them, so it's like, hey, like just puts things into a different level of context where they can understand, oh shit, the thing that I'm accusing you of is something that I'm doing, and then it's like.
Because you're the one that thinks that you're better than us.
Right. and it's so different than what I expected the show to be, because I heard a lot of people talk about like, oh yeah, well this one's so controversial. Oh man, he goes in on this.
Whenever you hear something's controversial, you should assume that it's mild.
Yeah, it was just it was the opposite. Like it was just like, I mean, it was so controversial. Like, oh, he's touching on all these subjects, but he's talking about it like in a way that
he's talked about baby gangbangers.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that controversial.
Yeah, man. It was just like he talked about it in a way that like that opened up the conversation to like, oh wow, like let's have a real conversation. Like after experiencing that kind of story, that's level storytelling in an entertaining way. It's like, now we could like have a conversation about it, and it's so deep and touches on so many things, but it's just then everyone just exploded. Oh, it's evil, oh, this asshole. Like, really? Like that's what you got out of it? And maybe it's just like you said, people who are hating against me like that, they didn't sit there and watch the whole show, so they don't understand the story in context. They look at, like they watch one series of the Harry Potter, one part of the Harry Potter story, and they're like, oh yeah, look, Professor Snape always refers to him as Mr. Potter. The level of respect this guy has, it's like, no the fuck he doesn't. It's like, you don't understand it in context, you have no fucking idea. Or maybe if you watch it, you know. But like if you're reading it, it's like, oh, Mr. Potter. Oh, he says it all the time. Such respect. Yeah, man. So it's just we need to get to a better
communicating space.
Yeah. We need to get that listening superpower back.
Well, we never had it. So I don't know if you need to get it back. We need to build it.
Yeah. Fair enough.